The call from the venue coordinator came in at 9:47 on a Saturday morning in September, 7 minutes before my mother was supposed to pin my veil. I had $118,000 of my own money tied up in a deposit at Chateau Beaumont, a vineyard estate in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and 200 guests already boarding shuttles coaches from downtown Toronto. The coordinator's voice was barely above a whisper when she told me the event had been cancelled 4 days earlier. My mother-in-law had come in person with notarized documentation and walked out with every cent. Before you ask, yes, I know how that happened. My fiancé had spent 6 months begging me to add his mother's name to the primary contract. She was old Rosedale. She sat on 3 hospital foundation boards in Toronto. She told him she simply needed to feel included in the planning. He said it was a formality. It would keep the peace. I believed him because I loved him, and because I was still, despite everything I had built, slightly afraid of the silence his family's disapproval could produce. My name is Rowan, and I was 29 years old, standing in a hotel bathroom in St. Catharines in my wedding dress, watching my future come apart through a phone speaker. I am a senior investigative journalist at one of Canada's largest daily newspapers. I have broken stories that forced parliamentary inquiries. I have sat across from men who run billion-dollar Bay Street firms and watched them sweat under a single question. I did not become someone who panics. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what I mean when I say I ignored the signs. I grew up in Scarborough, east of the city, the eldest daughter of 2 Filipino nurses who worked double shifts at Scarborough Health Network for 20 years so I could go to university without debt. Our house smelled like garlic rice as in laundry detergent. My parents spoke 3 languages between them and knew every neighbor on the street by name. When my fiancé first brought me home to the house in Rosedale, the kind of house with a name, with a carriage house out back, with a dining room table that seated 14, his mother looked at me the way a woman looks at a receipt she did not expect, not rude, just assessing. Over 3 years, the assessments continued. She called my family colorful. She asked, at the rehearsal dinner for his cousin's wedding, whether my parents still worked in the hospital. She said it the way some people say still renting. My fiancé always laughed it off in the car on the way home. He would squeeze my hand and say she didn't mean anything by it, that she was from a different generation, that I was too sensitive. He was wrong on all 3 counts, and I knew it. I stayed anyway. That is the part I have made my peace with. The coordinator's name was Sylvie. I asked her to read the cancellation paperwork to me over the phone, word by word. While she spoke, I walked out of the bathroom, sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, and opened my laptop. My mother stood in the doorway holding my veil with both hands. My best friend, who had been my maid of honor since we were 19, sat down next to me without saying anything. She had known me long enough to recognize what my silence looked like when I was working. I called my fiancé. He picked up on the 3rd ring. I could hear the ambient sound of a private room behind him, crystal, low voices, the particular acoustic quality of spaces built to make certain people feel at home and everyone else feel like a guest. We need to talk about Chateau Beaumont, I said. He exhaled, not surprised, relieved I think that I had found out so he didn't have to keep pretending. He said his mother had felt the vineyard was too casual for the firm partners attending. He said the National Club on Bay Street had an opening, an intimate gathering, 60 people, 60, when our guest list had 200. I asked him where he expected the 140 people who had driven from Scarborough, from Brampton, from Mississauga, from Richmond Hill, my parents' colleagues, my university friends, my grandmother's church group, where he expected them to go. He lowered his voice. He said the National Club had a strict guest policy. He said some of my guests might find it uncomfortable. He said his senior partners were voting on his equity position in November. He said he needed today to go smoothly. He said, and I want you to hear this exactly as he said it. You know how it is, Rowan, just for today. It's just an aesthetic thing. Aesthetic. I thought about my father working the overnight shift at 62 because his pension was clawed back by a policy change. I thought about my mother packing her lunch every day for 30 years. I thought about the $118,000 I had earned through 4 years of salary, freelance contracts, and a book advance. Money that my mother-in-law had just walked out of a vineyard office with, using a document my fiancé had begged me to sign. Tell the coaches to go to the National Club, I told my best friend. Don't stop at the gate. She looked at me for half a second. She nodded. She walked out to make the call. I opened a different folder on my laptop, not the wedding file, the other one. the one I had been building for 7 months. The National Club is a private members club on Wellington Street West in downtown Toronto, 143 years old. My fiancé's father sat on its membership committee. His mother had hosted 3 charity luncheons there in the past year using the Trinity Valley Foundation's event budget, a foundation she chaired, which raised money for pediatric mental health programs across Ontario. I knew things about that foundation that had not yet been published. The coaches arrived on Wellington Street at 11:22 in the morning. The doorman stepped outside when he saw 6 of them pulling up. He was not prepared for 6 coaches. He was especially not prepared for 140 people in formal wear, stepping out onto the sidewalk and walking calmly toward the entrance as though they had always been expected. My fiancé's brother-in-law, his younger sister's husband, a commercial real estate developer who had, at every family dinner I attended, found a way to ask exactly whereabouts in Scarborough I grew up, the subtext always unmistakable, was waiting on the steps. He had been sent to intercept. He was holding a check. He handed it to me without greeting. I looked down at it. $12,000, made out to me. "Consider it a courtesy," he said. "Send your guests somewhere nice for dinner. The distillery district has lovely restaurants. They'll be comfortable there." He said comfortable the way he had always said it, like a euphemism for something he didn't want to name out loud. I held the check between my fingers for a moment. I thought about everything that number wasn't. I thought about the fact that this man had just suggested, politely, and with a straight face, that the people who raised me should wait in a different part of the city while his family celebrated the wedding I had paid for. I tore the check in half, then in half again. I let the pieces fall on the Wellington Street pavement. "You should go inside," I told him. "You'll want to be there for this." My fiancé found me in the lobby. He grabbed my elbow. He said I was making a scene. He said I was going to cost him the equity vote. He said I needed to think about his future, our future, what this looked like to the partners standing 15 feet away. He looked past me at my parents standing near the coat check. My father in his good suit, my mother holding her clutch with both hands, and he said quietly, as though the quiet made it acceptable, "Can you please stop acting like this is Scarborough?" I had been holding the thread of my composure for 3 hours. That sentence cut it clean. I stepped back. I looked at the man I had agreed to marry. I thought about the times I had bitten my tongue at his family's table. The times I had laughed off his mother's remarks to keep the evening moving. The years I had spent being grateful to be let in, when I should have been asking why the door existed in the first place. "You know what I've been working on for 7 months," I said, "don't you?" Something shifted behind his eyes. "Don't," he said. His mother appeared at his shoulder, cream silk, pearls, the performance of a woman wrongly inconvenienced by someone else's poor judgment. She told me, in a voice pitched to carry, that I was disrupting a private member's event. She said she had arranged this venue as a gift, a more appropriate setting. She said my original guest list would have created the wrong atmosphere for the professional relationships that mattered to their family's future. She said she had done this to protect me, and she hoped I would understand that someday. My father-in-law stepped forward. He was always quieter than his wife. That was the thing about him. He didn't need volume. He had spent 30 years building a Bay Street investment management firm on the assumption that he was the smartest person in every room he entered. He walked me 2 steps to the side and told me in a murmur that he admired what I had built. He said my career, my reputation, was impressive given where I had started. He said that if I chose to escalate today, he would instruct his firm's legal team to bury my newspaper in defamation suits for the next 4 years. He said he knew my editor. He said he had friends on the paper's board. He said women in my position didn't recover from that kind of prolonged litigation. He smiled when he finished, a patient smile, the smile of a man who has delivered this kind of message before and watched it land. I let a moment pass. "I appreciate the candor," I said. I pulled my arm back gently. "I want to show you something." My best friend handed me the document bag she had been carrying separately since we left St. Catharines. I removed a folder and held it without opening it. 7 months ago," I said, and now I didn't bother keeping my voice low, "the Ontario Securities Commission began a quiet investigation into your firm's management of a pooled investment fund. Specifically, whether the fund's redemption terms were misrepresented to 340 retail investors who lost a combined $6.3 million when the fund was wound down in January." My father-in-law's patient smile stopped moving entirely. I have been the lead journalist on that investigation since March, I continued. My editor has been holding publication pending a response from your legal team, which has had 4 months to provide one. The story runs Monday. You're bluffing, my fiancé's brother-in-law said. His voice had lost its earlier ease. I don't bluff, I said, I verify. His mother stepped forward. The composure had cracked enough now that I could see something frantic beneath it. She said I was a liar. She said I was using my profession as a weapon against her family. She said, and this was her mistake, the one I had been patient enough to wait for. She said that she had every right to manage the wedding arrangements, that she had put considerable effort into making today happen properly, that the deposit had simply been redirected to cover this room, and that she expected, when I calmed down, to be thanked for her trouble. The deposit had been redirected. She expected to be thanked. Did you get that? I said. My best friend, who had been standing 3 feet behind me with her phone since my mother-in-law began talking, nodded. The voice memo had been running for 9 minutes. The club had called the Toronto police at 11:34, not because anyone had done anything, but because the sight of 140 brown and black people in formal wear in their lobby had apparently constituted a reason to dial. 2 officers arrived at 11:41. They came through the entrance. They looked around. They did not see a disturbance. They saw a wedding party standing quietly in a member's dining room. The constable who approached me was professional and calm. I showed him my press credential. Then I showed him a letter from the club's general manager, who I had called from St. Catharines at 10:15 that morning, because the general manager was a source I had protected through 2 separate investigations over 4 years, and because when I called him and described what was happening, he told me that no event at the club required anything less than signed authorization from the events office, and that no such authorization existed for the gathering my mother-in-law had arranged, which had been booked under her foundation's name using a credit account that was, it turned out, $40,000 overextended. The foundation's account. The Trinity Valley Foundation, the pediatric mental health charity. I handed the constable the second document in the folder, a summary prepared by a forensic accountant consulting on my newspaper's investigation for 3 months. It showed $74,000 in foundation funds transferred to a private account in 11 transactions over 8 months. My editor had advised against publishing it until we could confirm intent. My mother-in-law had just confirmed intent on a 9-minute voice recording by admitting she had redirected my $118,000 wedding deposit, money she had no legal authority to touch beyond the original contract, to fund a private social event at a charitable organization's expense. She had confessed to financial misconduct against a children's mental health charity because she wanted to win an argument about a guest list. My fiancé's brother-in-law left through the side entrance before the second officer reached him. He made it as far as Front Street. My fiancé did not try to leave. He sat down in one of the club's leather chairs in his morning suit with his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a long time. When he finally looked up at me, he didn't ask me to stop. He just asked me why. Because your mother told my family they didn't belong here, I said, and you agreed with her. I took the ring off. It was a good ring, his grandmother's original setting, remounted at a jeweler on Bloor Street. I set it down on the side table next to his chair. I hope the equity vote goes well in November, I said. It didn't. That part came out in the Monday edition under my byline. My parents, my grandmother's church group, my university friends, my colleagues from the newsroom, all 140 of us, walked out of the National Club and drove to a converted warehouse in the Junction that my editor had quietly booked the moment I called him from St. Catharines that morning. He had catering arranged inside of 4 hours. My photographer colleague brought her good camera. Someone set up a Bluetooth speaker, and my father danced with my mother in the middle of the floor while the evening light came through the industrial windows. And nobody asked them where they were from. And nobody made them feel like they needed to explain themselves, and my grandmother drank a glass of Prosecco and pronounced it acceptable, which from her is the highest possible praise. The OSC investigation became public that Monday. The forensic accountant's summary of the foundation transfers ran with it as supporting documentation. My mother-in-law was charged with breach of fiduciary duty and fraud under the Ontario Charities Accounting Act 6 weeks later. My fiancé's brother-in-law entered a cooperation agreement with a parallel proceeding. The equity vote at the firm was postponed indefinitely and then quietly cancelled. My fiancé sent me 2 messages in the weeks that followed. I read both of them. I did not respond to either one. Here is what I know now that I didn't let myself know then. A person who asks you to make yourself smaller is not protecting you from the world. They are protecting their own comfort from you. I spent 3 years translating my family into something easier for his family to digest, and the translation was never going to be good enough, because the problem was never my family. The problem was that some people build their entire sense of worth on the idea of exclusion, on the locked door, the guest list, the right postal code, and when you stop being excludable, they have nothing left to stand on. My parents still live in Scarborough. My father retired last spring. My mother has finally started sleeping in on weekends. On Sunday mornings, I drive out east on the 401 and we eat garlic rice at the kitchen table, and my grandmother makes me take leftovers home because she is convinced I don't eat enough during the week, which is probably fair. I am 30 years old. I am not married. I am working on a story that I think will matter. That is more than enough.